The school trip was supposed to be educational. Instead, it became a hostage crisis when armed terrorists entered the Natural History Museum. 47 children trapped, 5 professional killers, and one grandfather who hadn't told anyone about his 30-year military career. What happened next would prove that legends never truly retire. Welcome to the Real Life Stories. Before we begin this powerful story, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. Grandfather had taken his granddaughter on a school trip to the museum. When masked gunmen stormed the building, the kid saw just an old man with a walking cane. What they didn't know was that those hands had once held the longest confirmed kill shot in military history, and today, they would hold a rifle one last time. Harold Mitchell checked his watch as the yellow school bus pulled into the parking lot of the Natural History Museum. 9:47 a.m., right on schedule. At 72, Harold had learned to appreciate punctuality, a habit that kept him alive through 3 tours of duty and now made him the most reliable chaperone at Riverside Elementary. "Grandpa, you brought your thermos again," 8-year-old Emma giggled, pointing to the worn steel container he carried everywhere. "Mrs. Peterson says coffee isn't good for old people." Harold smiled, his weathered fingers adjusting his reading glasses. "Mrs. Peterson is probably right, sweetheart, but some habits die hard." He didn't tell her that the thermos wasn't just for coffee. Inside, beneath the false bottom he'd crafted decades ago, lay a small emergency kit, items that most grandfathers would never need. But Harold Mitchell wasn't most grandfathered. The museum's great hall buzzed with the excitement of 47 third graders, their voices echoing off the marble walls beneath the skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Harold positioned himself near the back of the group, leaning slightly on his walking cane, a prop he'd been using for 6 months, ever since the school district had implemented new safety protocols requiring chaperones to appear non-threatening to the children. The irony wasn't lost on him. For 30 years, Harold had been one of the most lethal men in the U.S. Army. Master Sergeant Harold Mitchell, 1st Battalion, 24th Infantry Regiment, 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, and a classified record that would remain sealed until long after his death. But to these children, he was just Emma's grandfather who brought homemade cookies to class parties and always volunteered for field trips. "Attention, everyone," called Mrs. Peterson, clapping her hands. "We're going to split into 3 groups. Group A will start with a dinosaur exhibit, Group B with mammals, and Group C with the planetarium. Stay with your assigned chaperone at all times." Harold found himself responsible for Group C, 12 children, including Emma, heading to the planetarium in the museum's east wing. As they walked through the corridors lined with display cases, Harold's eyes automatically scanned the environment. Exit points, security cameras, crowd density, old habits. The planetarium show was about to begin when Harold noticed something that made his blood run cold. 3 men in maintenance uniforms had entered through the staff entrance. Their movements were too coordinated, too purposeful. One kept checking his watch while the other 2 positioned themselves near the main exits. Harold's training kicked in instantly. He recognized the pattern, a classic pincer movement designed to control escape routes. His hand instinctively moved to his hip, where for 3 decades he'd carried a sidearm. Nothing there now but his wallet and reading glasses case. "Mr. Mitchell, are you okay?" asked Tommy, one of the students. "You look funny." Harold forced a smile. "Just remembered something I forgot to tell your grandmother. Son, nothing to worry about." But everything was wrong. The maintenance men were too young, too fit. Real janitors move with the weariness of long hours and physical labor. These men moved like operators. Then Harold saw the 4th man entering through the main entrance. No uniform this time, just a visitor's badge and a large backpack. The man's eyes swept the room with the same professional assessment Harold had just completed. Harold's mind raced through calculations. For men, professional coordination, control of exits. This wasn't a robbery. This was something much worse. "Kids," Harold said quietly, "I need you to do exactly what I tell you. No questions, no noise. Can you do that for me? The children nodded, sensing the change in his voice. Emma looked up at him with wide eyes. Grandpa, what's wrong? Before Harold could answer, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting eerie red shadows across the planetarium. In the distance, Harold could hear screaming from the Great Hall. His worst fears were confirmed when one of the maintenance men produced an assault rifle from his tool bag. "Nobody move," the man shouted in accented English. Everyone on the ground, hands visible. Harold's military instincts took over in one fluid motion. He pushed Emma behind the nearest display case and signaled for the other children to follow. 12 pairs of eyes looked to him for guidance, and for the first time in 6 years, Harold Mitchell felt a familiar weight of command responsibility. "Listen carefully," he whispered to the children huddled around him. "We're going to play a game called Silent Soldiers. The rules are simple. Stay quiet, stay low, and do exactly what I tell you. The first person to make noise loses points for the whole team." The children nodded solemnly. Harold was amazed at how quickly they adapted. Children were remarkably resilient when given clear instructions by someone who radiated confidence. Through the dim emergency lighting, Harold could see the gunmen moving to the museum with military precision. They were herding visitors toward the Great Hall, turning the space into a centralized killing zone. Harold counted at least 5 men now, all armed with automatic weapons. His mind automatically began tactical assessment. 5 hostiles, unknown number of civilians. Single choke point at the main entrance. The building was old, constructed in the 1920s with thick stone walls and limited exit points. Perfect for defense, terrible for escape. "Tommy," Harold whispered to a boy near him, "you're the fastest runner in your class, right?" The boy nodded proudly. "I need you to crawl, very quietly, to that red door over there. Can you see it? When I give you the signal, I want you to push the bar and run. Don't look back. Don't wait for anyone. Run straight to the parking lot and find a police car. Tell them Code Red at the Natural History Museum. Can you remember that? Code Red at the Natural History Museum," Tommy repeated. "Good boy, but don't move until I say so." Harold turned his attention back to gunmen. They were speaking in what sounded like Eastern European accents, coordinating their movements with hand signals. Professional, but not special forces level. Probably ex-military, hired muscle rather than ideologically motivated terrorists. That was both good and bad news. Good because they were less likely to commit mass casualty attacks without clear tactical advantage. Bad because they were skilled enough to maintain discipline under pressure point one of the gunmen was approaching their hiding spot. Harold could see the man's boots through the gaps in the display case. Heavy tactical boots, probably steel-toed. The man was moving methodically, checking each potential hiding spot. Harold made a decision that would have been impossible for the grandfather who'd entered the museum that morning, but came naturally to Master Sergeant Mitchell. Harold slowly removed his reading glasses and placed them carefully in his shirt pocket. Then he gripped his walking cane, not as a crutch, but as a weapon. The cane was solid oak, weighted at the handle. He'd had it specially made by a craftsman in Virginia, who understood that some veterans needed tools that served multiple purposes. The gunman was 3 feet away now, his rifle held at low ready. Harold could see the man's tactical vest. Here's controlled breathing. Professional, but overconfident. Harold struck with the precision of a man who'd spent decades perfecting the art of violence. The weighted handle of his cane caught the gunman behind the ear. Not hard enough to kill, but perfectly placed to cause immediate unconsciousness. The man dropped silently, his rifle clattering against the marble floor. The children watched in amazement as their mild-mannered chaperone quickly stripped the unconscious man of his weapon, ammunition, and radio. Harold's movements were efficient, practiced. This wasn't the first time he'd done this. "Emma," Harold whispered, "Grandpa needs you to be very brave right now. Can you do that for me?" His granddaughter nodded, her eyes wide but trusting. Harold keyed the radio he'd taken from the downed gunman. The conversations he intercepted confirmed his worst fears. This wasn't a random attack. It was a coordinated assault designed to create maximum casualties for maximum media impact. The gunman had explosives positioned at key structural points. They weren't planning to negotiate. "Tommy," Harold said, "it's time to run. Remember what I told you." The boy nodded and crawled toward the emergency exit. Harold watched him disappear into the corridor, then turned his attention to remaining children. "Kids, I need you to know something. Your grandfather isn't exactly who you think he is. A long time ago, before I was a grandfather, I was a soldier. A very good soldier. And right now, I need be that soldier again to keep you safe." 8-year-old Sarah raised her hand tentatively. "Are you going to fight the bad men, Mr. Mitchell?" Harold looked at her seriously. "Yes, sweetheart, I am. But first, I'm going to get you somewhere safe." He led them deeper into the museum, away from the main conflict zone. His knowledge of the building's layout, gained from dozens of previous field trips, now served a different purpose. He guided them through a service corridor that connected to the museum's research wing. "This is where we're going to wait," Harold said, opening a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." "There's a phone on the desk. In exactly 10 minutes, I want you to call 911 and tell them where you are. Can you do that?" The children nodded solemnly. "Emma," Harold said, kneeling down to his granddaughter's level, "I want you to take care of everyone until help arrives. You're the leader now. Can you do that for Grandpa?" Emma nodded, tears in her eyes. "Will you come back?" Harold smiled and touched her cheek. "I promise I'll try my best, sweetheart. But if I don't, I want you to remember that everything I do today is because I love you." Harold sealed the children in the research wing and turned his attention to the tactical situation. He now had a rifle, limited ammunition, and decades of experience. But he also had something the gunman didn't expect: intimate knowledge of the battlefield. Using the museum service tunnels, Harold moved to the building like a ghost. He'd studied these corridors during countless field trips, noting every security camera, every maintenance access point, every potential sniper position. The Great Hall had been turned into a nightmare. 47 children and adults lay on the marble floor, surrounded by armed men. Harold could see Mrs. Peterson trying to comfort crying students, while keeping herself between them and the gunman. Harold's radio crackled with updates from the terrorist command structure. They were waiting for something, probably news coverage or a response from authorities. That gave him time, but not much. From his position in the balcony overlooking the Great Hall, Harold could see the entire tactical situation. 5 gunmen, strategically positioned to cover all approaches. Explosives placed at structural points. Civilians clustered in the center of the room, creating a human shield. T was exactly the kind of impossible situation Harold had been trained to handle. Master Sergeant Mitchell had earned his reputation in Afghanistan, where he'd spent 3 tours as a sniper attached to special operations units. His longest confirmed kill was 47 meters, a shot that had saved an entire patrol from an enemy ambush. The Army had wanted to publicize the record, but Harold had requested the information remain classified. He'd never want to be famous for taking lives. Now, at 72, with arthritis in his hands and reading glasses in his pocket, Harold Mitchell was about to remember why he'd been considered one of the most effective soldiers of his generation. He keyed the radio, imitating the accent he'd heard from the gunman. "Team 2, what's your status?" "Team 2 secure," came the reply. "All exits covered." Harold smiled grimly. He'd just confirmed that there were at least 2 more gunmen he hadn't accounted for. Information was ammunition, and he was gathering both. Harold positioned himself in the museum's upper gallery, where a maintenance platform provided perfect concealment and clear sight lines to the Great Hall below. The rifle he'd taken was a modified AK-47, reliable, but not the precision instrument he was accustomed to, and no matter. Harold had made impossible shots with worse equipment. He studied the scene below through the rifle's basic iron sights. The gunmen were confident, relaxed even. They positioned themselves with tactical competence, but without the paranoid awareness that comes from facing a skilled opponent. Harold's first shot would have to be perfect. Miss, and 47 innocent people would die in the crossfire. He selected his target carefully, the leader identifiable by his position and the way the others deferred to him. The man was standing near the information desk, roughly 60 meters away. An easy shot under normal circumstances, but Harold's hands weren't what they used to be. Harold controlled his breathing, feeling his heart rate slow to the familiar rhythm of precision shooting. The arthritis in his trigger finger was a constant ache, but he'd learned to work around it during hundreds of hours of practice at the local shooting range. Practice sessions, he told Emma, were just for fun. The shot had to account for the rifle's unfamiliar ballistics, the emergency lighting that created shifting shadows, and the angle from his elevated position. Harold made microscopic adjustments, his muscle memory reaching back across decades of training. He squeezed the trigger. The leader dropped instantly, a perfect headshot that eliminated the threat without endangering the hostages. The other gunman spun toward the sound, but Harold was already moving, using the gallery's stone pillars for concealment. Chaos erupted in the Great Hall. The remaining gunmen opened fire wildly, not sure where the threat was coming from. Harold used their confusion to his advantage, moving through the shadows like the ghost he'd once been. His second shot came from a different angle, dropping another gunman before the man could process what was happening. Harold's positioning had been perfect. Each shot came from a different location, creating the impression of multiple snipers. The three remaining gunmen were now in full tactical mode, using the hostages as human shields while they tried to locate their invisible attacker. Harold could hear them communicating in their native language, their voices tight with stress. This was the moment Harold had been training for his entire adult life, even if he'd never expected to use those skills as a grandfather protecting his own granddaughter. Harold moved through the museum's upper levels like a predator, using every shadow and architectural feature to his advantage. The building's 1920s construction worked in his favor. Thick stone walls that muffled sound, multiple levels that provided concealment, and narrow corridors that channeled movement. But the remaining gunmen were adapting too. They'd formed a tight defensive circle around the hostages, making it impossible for Harold to take a shot without risking civilian casualties. Harold needed to change the dynamic. Using the museum's public address system, he keyed the microphone in the security office. "This is Master Sergeant Harold Mitchell, United States Army, retired." His voice echoed through the building. "You are surrounded by forces you cannot see and cannot fight. You have 30 seconds to surrender your weapons and release the hostages." It was a bluff, but it was delivered with the absolute conviction of a man who'd spent decades commanding respect through voice alone. The gunman's response was predictable. They opened fire at the ceiling, trying to hit speakers and eliminate Harold's psychological advantage. But Harold had anticipated this. He'd already moved to his next position, a service corridor that provided access to the museum's main electrical system. When the lights went out completely, Harold owned the battlefield. In complete darkness, Harold's advantages multiplied exponentially. He knew every inch of the museum, while the gunmen were trapped in an unfamiliar environment with panicking civilians. Harold had spent months in the mountains of Afghanistan, where night operations were routine. He'd learned to move silently, to navigate by touch and sound, to become invisible in conditions where most men would be helpless. The gunmen were firing randomly now, their muzzle flashes revealing their positions while destroying their night vision. Harold moved between their shots, closing distance with the patience of a predator. His third shot came from point-blank range, eliminating a gunman who'd been firing toward the ceiling. Harold had approached from behind, using the man's own weapon discharge to mask his movement point to left. Harold could hear Mrs. Peterson's voice in the darkness, calmly instructing the children to stay low and remain quiet. Her courage under pressure reminded him of the best officers he'd served with, leaders who maintained discipline even when the world was falling apart. The remaining gunmen were now back to back, protecting each other while trying to control the hostages in complete darkness. It was a defensible position, but Harold had been in worse situations. He retrieved a small flashlight from his emergency kit, the one hidden in his thermos. A brief flash of light, carefully directed, revealed the gunmen's exact positions. Harold processed the tactical information in milliseconds, then returned to darkness. His fourth shot was the most difficult of the engagement. The gunmen were positioned so that a miss would likely hit civilians. Harold had to account for the target's movement, the angle of the shot, and the possibility that the muzzle flash would reveal his position to the final gunman. The shot was perfect. The fourth gunman dropped, his weapon clattering away in the darkness, point one left. The last gunman was now desperate, his voice cracking as he shouted threats in broken English. Harold could hear him moving through the hostages, using them as human shields while he searched for an escape route. This was the most dangerous moment of the engagement. Desperate men made unpredictable decisions, and Harold couldn't risk civilian casualties in his final shot. Harold began to speak, his voice calm and conversational in the darkness. "Son, my name is Harold Mitchell. I'm a grandfather, just like you might be someday. I don't want to hurt you, but I can't let you hurt these children." "Where are you?" the gunman screamed. "Show yourself." "I'm right here," Harold said, his voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I've been watching you for the past 20 minutes. I know exactly where you are, but you have no idea where I am. That's not a fair fight." Harold was using psychological warfare now, the same techniques he'd employed in Afghanistan to force enemy snipers into making mistakes. The human mind couldn't handle the stress of being hunted by an invisible opponent. "I'll kill them all," the gunman shouted. "No, you won't," Harold replied calmly, "because you're not a killer. You're a soldier who made bad choices. I can hear it in your voice. You didn't sign up to murder children." Harold was moving as he spoke, using the sound of his own voice to mask his approach. He could hear the gunman's breathing, rapid and panicked. "You have one chance to walk out of here alive," Harold continued. "Drop your weapon and surrender. I give you my word as a soldier that you won't be harmed." The gunman's response was to fire blindly into darkness, his shots going wide. Harold could hear children crying. Mrs. Peterson's voice trying to calm them to Harold's final shot came from less than 10 feet away. It was the most difficult shot of his career, not because of distance or conditions, but because of what it represented. He was no longer a young soldier fighting for his country. He was a grandfather fighting for his granddaughter's life. The shot was perfect. The threat was eliminated. When emergency lighting flickered back on, Harold was already moving through the hostages, checking for injuries and providing reassurance. His military bearing was fully evident now. The cane forgotten, his movements precise and confident. "Is everyone okay?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of command. "Mrs. Peterson, do we have any injuries?" The teacher looked at him with new understanding. "Mr. Mitchell, who are you?" Harold smiled, the familiar grandfather returning to his features. "I'm just Emma's grandfather, Mrs. Peterson. Someone who happened to be in the right place at the right time." But the children saw something different in his eyes now. The mild-mannered chaperone had disappeared, replaced by someone who belonged in the stories they read about heroes and warriors. Police sirens could be heard approaching the museum. Harold quickly moved through the scene, collecting the weapons and securing the area with the efficiency of a man who'd done this before. "Kids," he said, addressing the group of frightened children, "I need you to do me a favor. When the police ask what happened, tell them the truth. Bad men came to hurt you, and we stopped them. But remember, the most important part today wasn't the fighting. It was that you were brave, you followed instructions, and you took care of each other." When the SWAT team finally breached the museum's main entrance, they found a scene that would puzzle investigators for months. 5 armed men, professionally neutralized by shots that demonstrated extraordinary marksmanship. 47 hostages, unharmed, and one grandfather sitting quietly on a bench, sharing his thermos of coffee with a group of children. Harold Mitchell gave a statement to the police with the same calm precision he demonstrated during the engagement. He answered their questions honestly but without elaboration, providing facts without revealing the decades of training that had made his actions possible. "Mr. Mitchell," the lead detective said, "your actions today were extraordinary. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Harold adjusted his reading glasses and smiled. "I did some hunting when I was younger, officer." "Amazing what you remember when you have to." The detective wasn't satisfied with that answer, but Harold's military records were classified, and he wasn't volunteering additional information. As far as the official report was concerned, Harold Mitchell was a retired machinist who demonstrated remarkable courage under pressure. Emma ran to him as soon as the police finished their interview, Grandpa, you were like a superhero. Harold hugged her tightly, feeling the weight of what he'd had to do. No, sweetheart. I was just a grandfather who loves his granddaughter very much. As they walked toward the school bus that would take them home, Emma looked up at him with new eyes. Grandpa, were you really a soldier? Harold stopped walking and knelt down to her level. Yes, Emma. A long time ago I was... But that was before I was a grandfather. Being your grandfather is the most important job I've ever had. Will you tell me stories about being a soldier? Harold considered this carefully. Someday, when you're older, I'll tell you some of the stories that matter. The ones about courage and protecting people and doing what's right even when it's hard. They continued toward the bus. Grandfather and granddaughter, their relationship forever changed by the events of that day 0.6 months later. Harold Mitchell still volunteers as a chaperone at Riverside Elementary. He still carries his thermos and uses his walking cane, though the children now understand that both serve purposes beyond the obvious. The museum incident made national news, but Harold's role was carefully downplayed in the media coverage. The official story credited quick thinking by chaperones and security personnel with preventing a tragedy. Harold preferred it that way. He'd never wanted to be famous for violence, even when that violence saved lives. Emma still asks questions about that day, and Harold answers them honestly but age-appropriately. She knows her grandfather is someone special, but she also knows he's still the same man who makes her favorite cookies and reads her bedtime stories. The school district quietly updated their chaperone policies, but Harold Mitchell remains the most requested volunteer for field trips. Parents who don't know the full story still sense something different about the quiet grandfather who seems to notice everything and worry about nothing. Sometimes, during quiet moments, Harold allows himself to remember the weight of the rifle in his hands, the precision of those final shots, the satisfaction of protecting the innocent. But mostly, he focuses on the present, on Emma's laughter, on the trust in children's eyes, on the simple joy of being needed not as a weapon, but as a guardian. The skills never fade. The warrior remains, hidden beneath the grandfather's gentle exterior, ready to emerge if ever needed again. But Harold Mitchell hopes that day will never come. Ian is studied at home, locked in a drawer beneath family photos and Emma's school artwork. Harold keeps a small notebook. Inside, he's written a single entry about the museum incident, not for glory or recognition, but as a record of the day he learned that some battles are worth fighting, regardless of age. The final line reads, "Today I remembered why I became a soldier, not for country or honor, but for the children who depend on us to keep them safe. Some duties never end." Harold Mitchell, Master Sergeant retired, grandfather active, guardian always.